In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains how you only see a small portion of the world and how it impacts your life.
Your vision is a very strange thing, and it's focusing on something very specific, and so you're pointing your eyes at something very specific, and that's what you seem to see. And so then that opens up a whole new universe of questions. It's like, how do you decide what to point your eyes at? That turns out to be an insanely complicated problem. John Vervaeke talks about that all the time as the problem of relevance. And the issue is, well, there's many things in the world. There's an infinite number of things, let's say, and you're not going to be able to see them, that's for sure, even if they happen to be changing, as it turns out. And so out of this mess, first of all, how do you pick what to look at? And second, even if you do pick it, how do you see it? Because it's so crazily complicated. So that's the problem that we're going to try to unpack. Now, roughly speaking, what seems to have happened with the gorilla video is you have to take that first theory that you make a complete model of the world, and then a complete model of the world, which is the objects in the world and how they're interacting. And you compare that to the objects in the actual world and how they're interacting. You have to modify that model. You say, well, no, you're certainly not making a complete model. And people should have known better anyways, even subjects to the limits of your perceptions, because there's all sorts of things in the world that you can't directly perceive. But what you're doing instead is, it's something like you're making a partial model of the world, but you're only making a partial model of the world that you're currently operating on with some goal in mind, and you're also comparing that to a model of the world as it's currently unfolding. Because the other thing that was implicit, this is really tricky, this is where you have to watch your implicit assumptions. The other thing that was implicit in the original cybernetic theory was that you have a model of the world that's complete, and then what you're watching is the actual world as it unfolds. And that's not a model, that's just your perception of the objects. But that also turns out to be wrong, because your perception of the world as it unfolds is also a model. And so what's happening is, you look at the world, the world you see is a model, and a very partial model at that, and then you compare it to the model that you expect, or desire, more accurately, desire, although the initial models were expectation. Because if you're in the lab listening to tones, it's not like you desire anything, but mostly when you're acting in the world, you have desires, and so the experimental constraints skewed the data in some sense by making people assume that what people were doing when they walked through the world was expecting instead of desiring. Anyways, you have a model of the world that's generated as you look at it. You have another model of the world that's something like the world that you desire. Then you compare both of them, and they can mismatch, and they can mismatch in a way that upsets your current pursuit. That's the critical issue. You don't see the anomaly unless it upsets your current pursuit. And you kind of know that too, because when you're, like, while I'm lecturing to you guys, you know, mostly you're sitting still, but people are moving their arms, and they're moving their glasses, and they're shifting their feet, and generally I don't see any of that, because what difference does it make? You know, it's not relevant to the ongoing what? Ongoing contract, the ongoing series of interactions. It's something like that. So as long as you keep your movements bounded within a range that doesn't interfere with whatever it is that we're doing, then it's going to be as invisible to me as the gorilla was when you were counting the balls. And the cool thing is about the gorilla experiment, or one of them, is that the reason you were blind to the gorilla was because you were counting the balls. And so that's so fascinating, because what it shows to a huge degree, an unfathomable degree, an unfathomable degree, is that the value structure that you inhabit determines what you perceive. It doesn't just determine what you expect or want. It bloody well determines what you see. And that makes the world a completely different place. No one really expected that. And so if you watch the basketballs, you see the basketball. If you stop watching the basketball, well, then you see the gorilla. And so the first question that arises from an experiment like that is, well, just exactly what is it that you don't see in the world? And the answer is all of it. You see so little, it's unbelievable. You see that tiny amount that's necessary for you to undertake the next sequence in your plotted movements, something like that. But then that becomes very complicated too, because it isn't obvious how you can conceptualize or how you can determine what your next movement is, because it's not like you just add up movements and make up your life. It's not that simple, and it's related to the novel problem, the problem of meaning in a literary work. So you imagine you're trying to specify the meaning of a literary work. Well, there's meaning in the word, and then but the meaning of the word is dependent on the phrase within which it's embedded, and then the meaning of the phrase is dependent on the sentence that it's embedded in, and the sentence in the paragraph, and the paragraph in the chapter, and the chapter in the book, and the book in the corpus of books of that sort, and then within the culture, and then within whatever your peculiar personal experience is. All of those things nested are operative to some degree when you're extracting out the meaning at any level of analysis. They're all operating simultaneously. And so you might say, well, what are you doing in this classroom? Well, the answer is sitting in a chair. But that's a very short-term and context independent answer. But you're also attending to what I'm saying hypothetically, and you're attending to some of it and not to other parts of it, and you're thinking about some parts of it and not other parts, and you're also attending a class, and the class is a sequence of lectures, and that's embedded within your desire to finish up the semester, and then to finish up the year, and then to get your degree, and then you nest that inside whatever it is, whatever the reason is that you're getting your degree. And then maybe that's nested inside your career goals, and that's nested inside your life goals, and that's nested inside your ultimate values, which you may or may not even be aware of. And so I could say, well, you're sitting here because it serves your ultimate values. Well, that's true. It seems a bit abstract to be useful, right? It gets so vague out at the outermost levels that it doesn't really have much specificity, right? So it seems to lack information. But by the same token, if I said what you're doing is sitting there, it has the same problem of too restricted meaning because of over specificity. And so there's some level in there that you would interpret as meaningful. God only knows why, and that's the level. There's a natural level of perception for that sort of thing. So for example, when children learn to name an animal, for example, they'll name cat. They don't name the species of cat or the subspecies of cat, and they don't confuse cats with dogs, even though they're both in the category of four-legged furry mammal. So why not call a cat and a dog furry mammals? Well, children don't do that. They go to cat and dog, and people who've studied the acquisition of language have found that there are basic level categories that children pick up first, and they're often represented with short words. And the words are short because they've been around a long time, because they seem to reflect the natural level at which people perceive the world. But none of that's obvious, you know. I mean, you could just lump all animals together for that matter and just call them animals, which we do sometimes. So anyway, so it's very difficult to specify the meaning level, and it's not very easy at all to figure out how we do it.